the day in the life of an inspector, and not just any old day, I suppose, the day in the life of a CQC inspector when they're out doing an inspection rather than a general day in their life. And thank you to all of you who've submitted your questions in advance, because those are really helpful for us in order for us to tailor today and cover what we think you're going to need. By way of introduction, those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Claire Sieber. I'm a GP and I'm Chief Medical Officer here at the Well-Led Provider. And I will let Gabby introduce herself now, and then followed by Gary, so you can meet the rest of the team.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see many of us in the room. So my name's Gabby, and I am a former CQC inspector and now an associate with the Well-Led Provider. So supporting with all things CQC. A little bit more from me later about a day in the life of, as Claire said, a day in the life of my day job, not my weekend activities. Yep, over to
Hi everybody, I'm Gary Hughes. I'm an associate for the Well-Led practice for the last 2 years, and for 16 years I've been in and around primary care, 13 years of that as a practice manager, and I support PCNs and federations and practices. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Kirsten, are you able to pop the slides up on the screen? Would that be okay? So what we're going to start off today with is our kind of usual little bit of breakdown of the statistics from the last month, so all of March's worth of inspections, so we can see how people are doing in terms of what they're achieving on their reports. I'll go through some of the questions that you asked in advance, because some of those were covered on our previous webinars, and I'll signpost you to those webinars. And then I'll let Gabby take on and talk you through the day in her life. Here are the slides coming. So in terms of the questions that you've asked us to date, there were quite a few questions submitted about how to make sure you're ticking the environmental sustainability box. And we did a whole webinar about that towards the end of last year. So when you receive the recording and the details on how to access the slides afterwards, you'll be able to click through onto that hyperlink for those of you who are interested in the environmental sustainability one. And likewise, we also got a lot of questions asking about inspector behavior, shall we say, during inspections, and how you can try and challenge anything that you think might be an inspector going a bit off-piste. Maybe somebody who seems to have a real special interest in something and is going down that direction, or you think there's a bit of bias being introduced. We did a whole webinar about that last month that was on the topic of what we called subjectivity, inconsistencies and bias. So again, when you get the slides, you can click on that link and view that one. Sorry about the issue with the slides here. There we are. We also had some questions about some general advice that you wanted to know about what sort of evidence you could put together, because as you probably understanding by now, it's not just your policies and procedures that mean you get through a CQC inspection. You have to demonstrate how your policies and procedures are actually working right through to the very end of them. So what Gabby's recommended in the past is something that she calls the 3 Ps, which is personnel, policies and patients, and having some evidence that relates to all 3 of those, which collectively then gives you enough evidence to demonstrate your compliance in that particular area. So we have more information about that in our CQC library on our software, for which you can get trial access to by clicking on that link when you get the slides. And then finally, we had a lot of questions about what is new with the single assessment framework these days, and what do we need to know if we haven't looked at the CQC for a year or so. And we did a nice summary of that at the end of last year. And again, the link there to the webinar is on the slides, which you'll receive afterwards. So that's a lot of your sort of pre-questions covered off by previous stuff that we've done today. I've introduced you to who we are, and at the end of the webinar, you'll get also to meet Mohammed, who's on the call, who's from the Medicines Management team. And Medicines Management team kindly sponsor this whole webinar series, and you'll find out more about them later. But I'll hand over now to Gabby, who can take over control of the slides and talk you through the inspection data from March. Over to you, Gabby.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire. So I'm just going to whiz along to, is that up to date then in terms of the March?
Yeah, if you take
2025?
control of the slides at the top, yeah.
Yeah, can everyone see? Are we on the March data slide? Okay, perfect. So yeah, as again, for those of you who are regulars on this webinar series, you'll be familiar with this layout that we put together just to give a snapshot of the up-to-date data. The usual caveat that we're not meeting on the last day of the month, so this is March so far, and we see the continuing trend in terms of adult social care versus GP practices, and the sort of significantly smaller amounts of GP practices that are being inspected, and also the percentages are remaining sort of the same in terms of what we see as good, the 1 or 2 outstanding that come through each month, and that we always recommend that you take a look at for best practice guidance and for learning opportunities. And then about a quarter of the practices in the GP practices this month have come out as either requires improvement or inadequate, but at only, well, we say eight services, so it sounds like a lot, but actually 8 compared to 23 is good. It means that we've got a much higher percentage of services that seem to be doing well. So some nice data to take on board this month. So what we're going to be looking at now is a day in the life of essentially what I do when I used to do inspections through the CQC, and what we do now when we do mock inspections for the well-led provider as well. So the CQC should provide, an inspector should always provide you with a list in advance of the documents or areas that they wish to be looking at. So and so depending on sort of what day and age we're in, some of you will have had the portal last year, or that's part of the year before. The rest we're currently still working by email, and some are being invited to use the portal as well. So there's a bit of a variety in terms of what platform the document requests are being managed on, receive guidance for that, and you will be required or requested to upload a number of documents and a number of pieces of information. And then that will also make it more clear what would be needed to be reviewed on site. It's important, and hopefully the CQC Inspector will make this clear, that anything that's reviewed or shared in advance is unlikely to be information that contains personal or sensitive data. So it's often usually more of the governance sort of side of things, policies, procedures, things such as training matrix, your policy audits, any lessons learned, anything like that, rather than data related to people. So the specific documents that I've listed that we might have a look at as part of our preparation from an inspection point of view would be kind of obvious, but your CQC report, your previous CQC report if you've had one, and also any enforcement action that's been taken and the associated action plans. So for those of you who have had a requires improvement or an inadequate rating in the past, you would have been asked to, depending on the level of breaches that were found, you would have been asked to complete an action plan, which usually has sort of a time frame in which you're hoping to complete and get things over the line for the CQC. So they'll be looking at that and using that to sort of inform a checklist, so that when they are on site, they can make sure that those things have been looked into. Other examples, as I mentioned, from a governance point of view, could include things such as your business continuity plan, your business strategy, any policies potentially related to the health and safety or security of the premises. That would also be used to inform the visit. So if, for example, the inspector themselves is thinking about accessibility needs, reasonable adjustments, adaptations, thinking about things such as fire safety checks, visitors who might be on site, all of those documents would help inform them from that point of view. They'll also be looking at any notifiable incidents or notifications that you've submitted, again, to give them an understanding of what's been going on at the practice recently. If there haven't been any notifications for a significant amount of time, that might be a question that they want to talk to you. Why hasn't there been anything? Or, you know, we've noticed a particular increase in a certain area. Can we talk about that? So the notifications will inform them. Any other regulatory body notifications that you've submitted as well, they'll want to make sure that your statement of purpose that they hold on the CQC portal is up to date. So hopefully everybody's familiar with the requirement to submit any revisions of an SOP within 28 days of any changes made to the CQC. So whichever one they hold from their end, they'll want to make sure that that's the one that you are also holding, and not that you've updated it since and not told the CQC, or that you've updated elements of your service but not updated your statement of purpose. And then other things such as the organisational chart or staffing structure, because again, that will help the inspector, or from my point of view, understand who it is that we'd like to speak to. When we're working with the practice manager or the registered manager to sort of sort out a schedule, that can be quite helpful as well, to understand who's available potentially remotely, who's available face-to-face, whether or not we might need to do group interviews for time management purposes, or because that's something that would work out best for the practice. So have a look at things like that. And then we'll also do some research regarding your online resources. So thinking about your website, is it up to date? Does it include the patient charter? And looking at your service search, so the Find a GP via the NHS website, the details that you hold sort of from a CQC point of view are also accurate on the NHS Find a GP, making sure there's no discrepancies there. And then just another thing that I've picked up is the functionality in the GP Connect, which doesn't come into place until October this year, but it's just something that I thought we'd put in there as a sort of a reminder. So the CQC will be looking to make sure that your website and any front-facing or patient-facing information is accurate and up to date. So we'll use that. Other elements of preparation would include any data that's been made that's available to us. So just an obvious caveat, but between what the CQC can access and what we can access at the well-led provider differ somewhat, but there is actually a surprising amount of information that is available in the public domain would be able to look at. But the CQC will be looking at information from the ICBs, your local health watch organisations. They might reach out to the complaints advocacy service, any voluntary and community sector organisations, the local authorities, medical committees, the PPGs, the other partnership feedback. So essentially what that means, and as an inspector, what I would do is I would have an email template that I would send local partners. So I would say, we're anticipating this inspection. If you've got any feedback that you'd like to give, positive or where you think areas could be improved upon, in advance, so then we can use that to inform the conversations and potentially guide us a little bit in areas that we might need to focus more than others. And from a well-led provider point of view, and again, something that Claire will be able to talk about a little bit later, we'll obviously review, if you are accessing that platform, then we will be able to review the data. So the well-led reports that you and your leadership team and that your workforce have been submitting and sort of utilising over a period of time. So we can use that to inform our practice as well, our inspection as well. So there is a little bit of information there from the CQC, just in terms of the other national charities that they work with. It may, depending on the service, it would or wouldn't apply for GP practices, but it's just worth noting that they've provided that information there for you about liaising with the Carers UK, Disability Rights UK, and also the Patients Association. So in my day might look, I've got a 9 o'clock start here. Hopefully, and some inspectors come earlier, some start later. Hopefully that's a conversation they'll be having with you in terms of logistics. It might be that you just physically can't sort of have us on site until 10 a.m. for logistics or for other reasons, or you might actually benefit from a much earlier visit, sort of an 8 o'clock start. But essentially we we come on site, and the first thing that I always like to do is a tour. So that's really just for my understanding so that I can get around the building for the next couple of days. But it's also pretty amazing how much you can pick up just from doing a walking tour around the service. So we're looking at, I mean, even just, you know, understanding where the bathrooms are, thinking about fire exits. You are able to ascertain a little bit about infection control, about health and safety, staff sort of accessibility, the workforce's understanding of the layout of the practice. So we'll try and get the tour in, and as I've said, that provides insight into things such as safe environments and risk management, which all then link to the quality statements that we're looking at for a comprehensive inspection. Hopefully the CQC will have advised in advance, or you were able to put up a sign to make sure that the patients know that the CQC inspector is on site, or that you're having a mock inspection. And that means that any visitors who do wish to speak to the inspector know that we're there and that we're able to have that conversation. And we're also making sure that you're doing correct things from a signing in perspective. So, you know, have you checked for ID? Do we have a visitor's sort of lanyard or something, you know, an equivalent for your practice? And then thinking about access to any ICT systems. So obviously the inspector will have their own laptop, but it might be that if you are wanting us to have sort of guest access, sometimes a login is set up for guests, just to be able to have access to things like policies or procedures or any other documents. So making sure that that's in place for us. So tend to get those sort of first bits sorted. And then we'll usually meet with the practice manager or the registered manager just to get a much more sort of concrete plan for the day. So this should have been in advance. Hopefully the inspector's liaising with you and you've got an understanding of what's happening, but it's just good to firm this up. So thinking about interview slots with the non-clinical team. We might want to find out if you've got any new starters, because that will be really helpful for us to speak to them to understand your induction process, your safe recruitment process. You might have absences that, you know, the unplanned absences, which mean we have to rejig things around, and to be aware of. So sometimes that can be sort of staff dynamics that are important for us to consider. It might be that you've got visitors coming that day, I don't know, how or another, you know, a clinical partner that's visiting, anything like that, because it might change our plan for the day, or it might mean that we need to dip in and out and have those conversations with those visitors if we can. And also ideally you'll be having sort of regular catch-ups with the inspector. I have mentioned before that because every inspector is different, some just like to kind of disappear for the day, work through things and then do end of day feedback. Some like much more regular catch-ups. I try and have a couple, but not too many. But essentially, on our own point of view, you want to at least feel assured that the inspector is going to be meeting with you, keeping you in the loop about anything significant or serious that they find. What you don't want to get to, and they shouldn't be doing this, is a situation where at sort of 5 o'clock they're saying, oh, we spotted a significant risk at 9:15 this morning. It should be that they're being fair and proportionate, because that's obviously the right thing to do from a safety perspective, but also they need to be able to give you an opportunity to fix that. So to demonstrate that you're sort of responsive and on board in terms of amending or resolving any issues that come up. Then it's about having that more in-depth discussion. This can include a presentation. I'm sure you've all in your capacities in GP practices have done presentations for the CQC. Some ask for them, some don't. But from my point of view, I've always preferred just to have more of a conversation with the RM or the PM, just to understand how things are going. So what's going well, and thinking about short, medium and long-term goals. And also, and in particular, looking at the support that they receive, because we'll spend a lot of the next 2 days speaking to the workforce that you probably directly line manage, but we want to understand what support you get and what's in place to make sure that you feel enabled and have the facilities and the resources to do your job. So we look at all of that, thinking about any significant incidents that have happened recently, any complaints or compliments, any big that might be going on, again, that might be relevant for our visit, but also can help us sort of case track anything in particular. So if you have had a significant event or you have had a complaint, we can sort of take 2 or 3 steps back and try to understand how that's happened, what's been done about it, and what your future proofing plans are. So we can then go behind the scenes and do a deeper dive into a relevant policy, a procedure, your note taking on your systems for complaints, team meetings, one-to-ones with that particular staff member, looking at the letters or communication that's been sent to the patients to keep them in the loop. So when Claire touched on the 3 Ps, if we know of anything in particular that's happened, we can kind of quickly apply that model to have a really thorough understanding of what's going on. Take some time to finalise the plan. And yeah, really, again, I've touched on this before, but what has to be managed well is you can't have too much time speaking to people or observing. You have to balance that with also doing the reviews of the policies and the procedures behind the scenes, because otherwise the questions that we ask or the judgment that we form won't be underpinned by the paperwork and the policies and processes that you've got. So any free time that comes up, I usually just be reading or observing and keeping the interviews to the specific times that we've planned. I probably also then like to do a second tour, just a second lap of the service by myself, just to check anything I've missed or to consolidate any notes that I've made, so that I can be really clear on anything I've identified. So here I might be looking at additional things such as making sure the medical supplies cupboards are locked, reviewing the contents for the doctor's bag, thinking about emergency drugs and contents there, looking at fridge temperatures and the associated logs that are kept, understanding where the controlled drugs are kept and the associated logs for those. Is it clear if you've got a first aid trainer who's available? Looking in the first aid box, thinking about things such as out-of-date stock, any material or medical related resources, such as the formulary that you'll be using, making sure that any information is accessible. So thinking about signs for complaints, for feedbacks, for chaperones, for safeguarding, anything like that. I'll just be using sort of my eyes and ears to make sure that that's all in place. And then thinking about things such as private areas, so, you know, or an isolation room for obviously for patients who require that, but thinking about other things such as for people who might be breastfeeding specific, you know, and that. So just taking all of those things into consideration. Then I usually try and spend the morning, just because you often find that mornings in GP practices are more hectic than the afternoons. So before lunchtime, I'll try and do some observations. That's very much just me sitting at reception. Sometimes I can do that sort of in reception. Other times I'll sit with the reception staff or with the front of house staff. And again, things that you can pick up there. So thinking about patient confidentiality, so how staff are speaking with patients and also speaking to each other about patients, you know, thinking how is privacy and dignity, kindness and compassion, how are they all demonstrated through the communication that's being managed with each other and to patients or visitors as well. It's always really useful as well. You can ascertain quite quickly how the triaging process works. So at what stages do non-clinical staff seek clinical guidance? How are the different teams and departments to get the best outcome for a patient quickly, so that they feel that the service is responsive, that they feel they've been heard to and listened to, and so that I can really have an effectiveness of any systems that you've got in place from a very and the beginning of a patient journey is what I'm thinking of. So it sounds like I haven't done a lot. It just sounds like I've walked around a couple of times and had a meeting, but actually you do achieve quite a lot in that time. So I'll try and have a break, decompress for a little bit and just reflect on anything that's come through, and then have a catch up with the registered manager, as I mentioned earlier, or the practice manager, just to, again, let them know of anything significant or any immediate risks, and also any questions that I've got so far. What I don't like to do is wait till the end of day 2 and then have sort of 30 questions that could have been answered sort of steadily and in a more steady pace throughout the couple of days. So I'll just try and resolve anything that comes up there. And again, it's an opportunity for the RM or the PM to ask me any questions or feedback anything that's come up so far. For example, they might have fixed something. I might have mentioned something at 10 o'clock in the morning to them, and they can tell me at lunchtime, okay, we fixed that now. So I'll be able to reflect that in the report from a responsiveness point of view. Then it's the afternoon. So again, this is obviously all open to depending on how your days look internally. But if there's any meetings of any kind or any sort of training event, any catching up, any guest speakers that are coming in, visitors, anything like that, a good way for me to understand more about teamwork, partnership working, and the sort of more of the governance processes. So if I can sit in on a team review, they're fantastic. They're such a good opportunity to look at the record keeping, so thinking about the quality of the agendas, who's in the room, how you look at actions from previous minutes, so who's responsible for what, have they been resolved, are we carrying anything over, why are we carrying things over, looking at the opportunity for staff or other personnel to ask any other questions, thinking about good record keeping. And really, it's an opportunity to look at leadership. So when we talked in the past in the 2024 series about capable and compassionate and inclusive leadership, meetings or events like this are a really good opportunity to see how they bring out the best in their staff and how they facilitate sort of learning and seeking best practice really, and looking at lessons learned. You can also understand quite a lot about staff competency, thinking, their local knowledge, their partnership knowledge in terms of onward referral working, and how they consider from a safe care and treatment point of view, how they consider patients from that side of things as well. Usually in advance for to meet with the patient participation group. So again, that can be done face-to-face or remotely. More recently, they're usually done remotely because lots of different people in one room from different areas. But either way, it's absolutely fine. And again, that's quite a specific and focused discussion that we'll be having about looking at examples of how you as a service have listened to and responded to patients, how you gather sort of feedback, how you're using that to inform improvements, and thinking about accessibility. And in particular, from a quality statement point of view, that leads quite nicely into looking at the equity and access experience and outcomes perspective. I might do so really then the afternoon I'll do interviews. And if there aren't any interviews, then I'll be doing governance reviews, as I mentioned earlier. So potentially looking at additional things, lessons learned log, your compliments or your complaints for the last 12 months, might look at your significant events from the last 12 months as well, and then verifying those against any notifications to the CQC. Thinking about your clinical audits, so probably we'll ask for a selection of clinical audits that have been undertaken and non-clinical audits as well. I'll try and get recruitment checks done, so looking at a sample of personnel recruitment files, and then linking that with their training, their induction, supervisions and appraisals, just to make sure that everything's sort of wrapped up nicely there. If you say you're going to do one thing in your induction policy, has that been done with a new starter? And can you evidence then ongoing competency for that particular staff member? Talking and looking at any staff surveys or any other wellbeing initiatives that you've got in place. Might look at palliative care registers as an example as well. So staff interviews, as I mentioned, they could either be done group to group or on a group to group, in a group or one-to-one, depending on a variety of factors. So it might be staffing levels, it might be whether you've got new starters, the particular roles and responsibilities that people have, and also really what works well for the organisation. So it might be that you do find that sort of a couple of HCAs or a couple together just because it is better for their schedule and better for them. So yeah, it's pretty flexible really with that. And then it's home time. So I've just talked through my whole day. So I usually, sounds really cheesy, but yeah, I'll just use that time to decompress, as I'm sure you all will after we've left as well. And just make sure that usually on that journey home, I'm just, processing everything I've seen, anything I've heard, any questions that I think, oh, I didn't ask that, I didn't double check that. Sometimes when I get home, I'll often then email the service just to thank them for the day, and make sure that that thanks is obviously extended to the workforce, but then really just reiterate or come back to them with anything specific. So I might have remembered that I didn't ask for a specific policy, so can they get that to me within a certain time frame? I often also find that on my journey has also done the same thing. So they've emailed me to say, oh, can we send you this? Or, you know, you mentioned this particular complaint or this compliment. We've now found the further details. So usually just have a quick look at anything like that. And it's day 2. Usually day 2, depending on the size of the service and what's going on, it will be pretty much a repeat of what's happened. So more interviews, more governance reviews, hopefully a catch up with the RM or the PM sort of at the midway point, and then always the end of inspection feedback, which probably will take place with the wider management team. So you might be your clinical leaders there as well, any partners that you've got. So thinking about that. Of top tips for this end of day feedback, because it is a question that comes up quite often in terms of, you know, when do we get it? How long do we get it? What do we do when we get it? So I'm just going to run through some top tips to get these slides, but can have a think about them. So make sure that you keep a log of any records or documents that the inspector has reviewed. This can be quite important because if you then get to the factual accuracy stage and you want to challenge something, let's say a complaint, and they might accidentally reference that it's a recent complaint, but you've got records to say that the one they reviewed was from 2021, let's say. So you need to be able to challenge from a proportionate point of view things of what's recent and what's not, or what's been resolved and what's not. So keep a log of anything that's being reviewed by the inspector. I'd also make sure that you are clear on what staff and how many staff have been spoken to. And that includes external visitors as well, because again, they might quotes or references or things that they've said. You want to be clear of where those sort of comments and where that's coming from. Keep a record of the number of patients spoken to, and ask any questions regarding concerns from a non-compliance point of view. So it's okay for you to say, you know, were there any significant concerns, or are there potential for any breaches? The inspector may not be able to give you sort of a thorough answer, but they should certainly be able to lead you towards, you know, knowledge from a risk point of view and keep you up to date with that. I'd also make a note and, you know, make sure that they've got a note of any work that you're committed to resolving in the coming days. So what can you do in the next sort of 2, 3, 4 days, the next week, to turn things around? Because the inspector won't have written the report, you know, in that time frame. But if you are able to resolve anything and then send them the evidence, then they should, from a proportionate point of view, be able to reflect that as well and take that into consideration. People often think that the inspection is just on site, but actually there's an inspection time frame and there's a process. So we often just refer to it as the inspection window. So it's important that you can have a think about that. Again, any information that they require from you, make sure you're clear on when it's needed by. If you've got any questions from a continuous learning point of view, you know, hopefully use that opportunity to ask them anything. And also if you've had any feedback from your team from the last couple of days, so if they found it to be a particular way, if they've got something that they would like you to ask the inspector, anything like that, feed that back to the CQC inspector, because it is helpful for their learning as well, and hopefully for their ongoing relationship with you as a provider. And I think that's it. Just talked for probably about 30 minutes straight there. So that is that's an overview of what we've got. So I think someone else is about to take control, and then we'll look at some questions and answers.
Yeah, that's me, Gabby. Thank you. Let's go through the audience Q&A now. So these were ones that we picked out at the beginning when you submitted your questions in advance. Thank you to those of you that did that. And I'm going to ask Gabby, and I'm also going to ask Gary as well, with his practice manager hat on, what he thinks about these questions. So first one, Gabby, policies, databases, they could feel overwhelming to keep up to date. If we have a suite of policies, but not all have been reviewed, but there is a plan for us to do this, how would that go down with the CQC?
Yeah, so I would say it's not very I would say essentially that, as we've talked about before, the CQC should take a proportionate approach to this. So there will be many factors that they'll take into consideration, such as what policies are out of date, how out of date they are. I mean, if, for example, your significant events policy is 3 years out of date compared to 2 months out of date, that's obviously a big difference. So they want to know how out of date they are, how many are out of date. So hopefully, as this person's identified, they've got a suite of policies. So presumably you'll have sort of a list of what you've got, when they were last revised and when they need updating. It's up to fail if all of your policies need updating in the same month every like 2 or 3 years, because then, you know, March is basically ruined. So it's not sustainable. So you need to stagger your audits and stagger your reviews over, you know, over each quarter. So if you say actually 75% of our policies are up to date and the next 25% are due this quarter, the CQC are going to take a much kinder approach to that than every single policy is out of date. They'd probably also do a little bit of a dig into the impact of policies being out of date. So if, for example, you're inducting a new starter and you're giving them old policies to read or out of date policies to read, and actually those policies don't reflect what you're currently doing, that won't go down well. So if I speak to a member of reception and they talk to me about the triaging process for an initial query, and then they're training a new starter and to do it one way, and then I read the policy and it says that's due another way, but the policy hasn't been reviewed for 2 or 3 years. When, again, earlier when we talked about the 3P, so the corners of your triangle won't match up there, and that would be more worrying. So thinking about the impact of your policy. The reasons why they're out of date, I mean, you know, if you've got absence, if you've got shortages in staff, there are things that they have to take into consideration. So what your plan to update them is. So as the questions mentioned, if there's a plan, that's obviously always very helpful. So that's my that's my inspector hat. I'll hand over to you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. I would say much the same thing. You know, don't do them all in the same month. You know, you wouldn't review your chronic disease patients all in the same month. So don't do that for policies, you know, audits, risk assessments, whatever it is. Schedule the dates across the year. If it's an annual or a 2 monthly, I would say sort of actually put it in the diary to do it the month or 2 before. Give yourself a bit of a window as well. You know, just schedule these things. The other thing, as an ex-practice manager, I would also, you know, protect the practice manager on this. It shouldn't be the practice manager that's reviewing all of the policies, or the registered manager for that matter. You know, make sure that you're using, whether you've got nurse managers, GPs, delegate these out and share the responsibility. And I think if it does get to the point that you get caught out in that 2-week window and there's some to do, make sure, again, it's not all on you. The GP partners own the business. Make sure they're getting involved as well. So that would be the advice I would say. But I think the scheduling the dates is the big one.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, the next question, which I thought was a nice one when I picked this one out. What's the #1 piece of advice you would give to a practice that's just received their notification of an inspection, Gabby?
So yeah, a bit similar to what Gary and I have just said actually about your policies and procedures is it's a 2-part answer, even though the person said one thing. It's lean on each other. So again, from a PM and RM point of view, don't feel that you have to get ready for the CQC all by yourself. It's not for you to get everything over the line. It's for you as a team. So identify who your leads are, identify who your experts are, identify people actually who might just be quite interested in the CQC process and want to learn more, and see if they can support you. And the other thing as well is don't reinvent the wheel. So often what I do find when inspections are announced or when we're going into services is they've all of a sudden created like an audit of an audit, and they've all created a new training matrix or a CQC version of a training matrix, something like that. And they've typed it up overnight. It's a little bit frantic, but they feel the need to have something to present to the CQC. Don't do that. Just stick to what you've got. You've already probably got, even if you haven't used it for a while, you probably already got the paperwork and the processes in place. So don't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. Look at what you've got, take a step back, identify what you've got, how that can be updated and revised to present to the CQC, and then lean on each other. That's my advice.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. You know, I would, first thing I would say is don't panic, and then make sure that you're telling everybody. So it's again not just on the practice manager, the registered manager. Don't panic and tell everybody. And then I would think, you know, if you've got a finite period, 2 weeks or whatever it is, to prepare, I would actually step back and right, what do we need to do to present ourselves in the best light, and be realistic about what you can do and, you know, what you can't do, and then share out, you know, that the tasks, the things that you need to do. Make sure you're sharing it out across the team. And again, I'll say, you know, GP partners, it's their business. So sharing out across the team and the GP partners, not just yourself or the registered manager. And just, you know, make sure you use that 2 weeks the best as you can, but not, you know, be sensible about what you can achieve in that time.
Thanks, Gary. Gabby, did you want to come in there again?
Yeah, just some food for thought actually on what Gary said is, yeah, absolutely, I completely agree. Do what you can and don't burn yourself out before it's even started, because a CQC inspector will send an inspector, like all of us, we will sense that exhaustion and that panic and that fear and that stress, and we will know that things have been put together last minute and overnight and sort of revised. So you can, but if you haven't got it, it's, as the first question's almost sort of you know, driven us to think about, it's okay, make a plan to get it or have it, or ask the inspector, do I need this, or I've got something a little bit different, is that what you mean? You know, we both just calling the same thing two different titles. So yeah, just look after yourself as well in the process.
Thanks, Gabby. Very important that. Just back to the question number one, there's been at least 2 questions, I think, in the chat, which I'm trying to keep on top of and respond to things as we go.
I'll have a look at them afterwards, yeah.
One was specifically about your policies, and do all policies need to be reviewed annually? And one question was, how often do policies need to be reviewed? And I'm sure you're going to say there's no set.
Yeah, no, they don't. No, not all policies need to be reviewed annually. It's a little, that question's a little bit like the DBS check that we spoke about last time. It's an urban legend that DBS checks have to be reviewed every 3 years, and it's an urban legend that policies have to be reviewed annually. That is for you to decide from a risk point of view and a best practice point of view. So yeah, each to your own, essentially. I wouldn't wait more than a couple of years for a review, but to have every single policy reviewed annually probably isn't proportionate. But Gary, have you got a thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on policies that I didn't say when I spoke. I wouldn't have any more than you need either. You know, some practices love a policy. So the other thing I would be doing, you know, is looking at how many you've got, where have you got overlap, where have you got duplication, you know, and actually don't have any more than you need, because all it does is make the job of reviewing them bigger.
Totally, yeah. And an example of that is a policy where I've seen policies for, some people have a complaints policy, a compliments policy, and then a concerns policy. And the concerns policy is for low-level feedback that hasn't quite met the threshold of a complaint. And you just think, just have a feedback policy, just one policy with good, bad, and very bad in there, and just absolutely take it from there.
Yeah, I would, as a practice manager, I would be working on what's the least number of policies that I can have, rather than how many policies do I need.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I see some that have got 80, 90 policies, and there's just no way. There's no way that's sustainable. Imagine a new starter coming in and you've got, you know, in your induction policy, you usually write something like 2 to 3 days to, and no one's reading 90 policies in 3 days. So have a think about that.
And this then leads me on, Gabby, to the number one question that we always get. It was asked at least 20 times by people when they were registering, and it's been asked loads of times. Please, can you tell me the list of the policies that I need to have for the CQC? And this is where you're going to say there is no list of policies, because it's not policy driven anymore.
No, not really. The a good place to start is, and we can send you the link, is the CQC registration process. So when a new provider now registers with the CQC tell you what policies you need just to register. So I would use that and I use that when I'm on an inspection. I'd use that as your starting point, and then from that build onto it. So depending on what you need. So for example, I can't think of an example, but yeah, I would I would use that list. If you Google CQC registration, we'll send the link afterwards. CQC registration, and then it's something called supporting documents, and they make it really clear what you need to begin with. So in fact, I'll put the link in the chat in a moment when we're carrying on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. And I know there's lots of questions in the chat. There's more than 300 of you on here, so we're not going to get round to doing all of these in the conversation. But what we usually do is we put them in a spreadsheet at the end, the question and the answer that we've given in the chat, or the answer that we've given afterwards, and make those available with the slides to everybody who's registered or attended. So then you can have a look back and see that we've tried our best to answer your questions afterwards. So if we come on to the last question that we were going to do today, it's this one, Gabby. How can you challenge events beyond your control of the practice? For example, the local pathology lab not working and the test results not being sent through to you. What about this? Things that are outside of your control?
Yeah, I mean, Claire, actually, you might have some food for thought here, but really, there's not a lot you can do, to be honest. You can review if there's contracts in place, obviously, review those. Escalate. So if there's a sort of a more senior person in the department that you're trying to get information from, establish that relationship so that you can escalate, or you can understand what's going wrong from both sides of the coin. And then also just keep a record of any attempt to resolve. So the CQC will appreciate that if we're not getting these results back in a timely manner, which is then having it like a domino effect from an impact point of view. If you can say, but we've sent this email, we've tried this, we've set up, an initial call, and also what you've done to sort of say from a safety net point of view. So if you're not getting things in the meantime, or in the time frame that you think is best practice, looking at, are there any associated risks and what can we do to mitigate those in the meantime? So yeah, sort of safety net the gap while you're trying to resolve the gap. But yeah, Claire might have some more thoughts, but if you can't make people do something, essentially.
No. Yeah, and most practices will put the sort of responsibility on the patient and say, your results will come through within X number of weeks. Let us know if there's a problem, with the caveat that for patients who aren't able to do that for themselves, such as those with dementia or with a learning disability, then there will be some sort of safety net in place. And I don't think you can do any more than that. It's an issue actually in my area at the moment as well, with things going missing from the lab. Thanks, Gabby. So if we move on, let me talk you through a little bit about the process that we can guide you through at the Well-Led Practice with our software. We have a piece of software that can help you to do what we call a well-led review of your organisation. And this seeks feedback from your staff in a kind of confidential, anonymised, quick, simple fashion against all of the quality statements and all the bits within the quality statements in the well-led domain. And then we'll give you a report so you can then create an action plan and demonstrate to the CQC that you're doing some improvement work if needed in the CQC well-led domain. And I'll take you through it in a bit more detail now, but you will your staff will receive a questionnaire such as this, asking them the things that we know the CQC inspectors will be asking anyway. But if you ask these in advance, you might be able to intercept a problem, or you can show the results to the CQC, and then they won't focus on getting staff feedback, but will focus on some other things instead. And your report will look something like this, where we will give you your results split out between how the leadership team view things going in the organisation and how the rest of the practice staff view things. So if there's a little bit of a gap between the two, then you can know and you can intercept that. And we also give you a benchmark so you can compare yourself to how the average practices are doing in our database. So you've got some good, decent evidence to show that you are well led, that your well led policies are actually working and filtering through down to your staff. And hopefully you've got some evidence to give to CQC as well to show that you're better than average when it comes to that. And those are something that Gabby uses when she's delivering her mock CQC inspections on our behalf as well. Because remember, she's not a CQC inspector anymore. She's a former one, and now she's turned to the other side and she helps practices and supports them through the process. And we have a library of resources and exercises for you to then go and do on your own without needing somebody expensive to come in and help you through them, all designed to focus you on the well-led improvement that you need. And this is the thing that I mentioned earlier, that you can have some trial access to if you'd like to have a little play around and see what it's like. And the link is on that slide at the beginning if you want to get the trial access. The practices and PCNs that use it, of which there's been about 80 in England so far, so it really helps them with their teamwork and their leadership developments and their action plans for CQC, and also demonstrating to not just the CQC but other people like the patient participation group, for example, that you're doing your best to be well led and to look after your staff when it's a difficult time in the NHS, to be honest. We have a range of workshops as well that we offer, as well as our software package that mainly Gary on our team delivers, who you've met today. We can do workshops about governance, CQC compliance, conflict management, well-being. We do our mock inspections, and we do coaching and mentoring for managers and leaders at whatever stage in their career they are. And here's some information which you can peruse at your leisure when you get the slides and see the recording afterwards. And you're welcome to book a one-to-one call with one of us on the team to discuss using our software if that's something that you're interested in. In terms of other webinars, you probably saw at the beginning in the chat, there was lots of ask about the webinar that we did yesterday. That's the one at the top about the GP contract. When you get these slides through, you can click on that link and you'll be taken to the recording of it, where the slides will be underneath. It was really well attended event, lots of questions about the new GP contract and the effect on practices' bottom lines and the changes to QOF, for example. And our next CQC webinar next month, we're covering some more of the practical aspects of CQC compliance, challenging factual accuracy, the implications of being requires improvement or inadequate, the implications of being outstanding and whether it's worth it and what you need to do to get there, and some common fail points that we've seen. And we've designed that webinar